Very sweet. And now we hear from some people who are in the room. First up is Robert French. Robert's been involved with gay activism since joining Campus Camp at the University of New South Wales in 1971. He was a member of ACT Gay Solidarity in the late 1970s and became active in the homosexual law reform campaign. He was co-convener of the gay rights lobby from 1982 to 86. Other involvements were as Vice President of the AIDS Council of New South Wales, ACON, as the Chair of the Board of the Sydney Star Observer, and recently he spent 7 years on the committee of the Pride History Group. Welcome, Robert.
Let us remember for a few moments just what it was like 50 years ago when Bon and Peter fell in love. There was no gay community, just small social gatherings of camps, as we referred to ourselves. A social club, the Pollies, which is still going, a couple of bars, the Rex, the Quarterdeck, and venues which opened on weekends such as Candy's Garden of Delights in Enmore, until Candy took over the Purple Onion at Kensington. Most socialising was done at home or on the beats. All very closeted, and for a very good reason. Society at large was hostile to homosexuals. The general stereotype was of a high-pitched voice or interested queen, who it was thought, if it was thought at all, made up probably 0.05% of the population. Kinsey's 1948 report hadn't been widely read nor believed, though actually he came close to getting it correct. Now, while we all knew of rumoured poofters and queens, usually in the entertainment industry, such as Robert Helpman and Frank Thring et al., there was no publicly self-identified homosexual man or lesbian woman, and for good reason. We were, in Gary Wotherspoon's words, naughty, sick and sinful, though the reality was much more brutal. We could be incarcerated for long periods, subject to judicial torture with the assistance of the medical profession, and damned to hell for loving someone of the same gender. And in the past, men had been subject to judicial murder, to be hanged for making love. Now, why has that been left out of Australian history? All that changed 46 years ago on the 10th of September, when John Ware was interviewed in The Australian with a photograph announcing the formation of the Campaign Against Moral Persecution, CAMP Inc., a clever Australian acronym. John never wanted to use the American designation gay. 9 days later, there was a longer piece with another photograph of John, but now also with fellow co-founders Christopher Pole and John's partner Michael Cass, whose back was turned to the camera because he was about to be interviewed for a job, in indication of the times. Crucially, this article included a contact postal address. John and Chris thought they were founding a small group of knowledgeable people who would counter the popular stereotypes about homosexuality, particularly in the media, and provide some support. Actually, they started a revolution. We can now talk of BC and AC, before camp and after camp. The founders were inundated with letters and quickly realised that a much larger society group was inevitable, and this was formally instituted in February 1971. Camp New South Wales, as it became known when other state branches formed, was something of an umbrella group, with various subgroups hanging off it: the social group, the legal groups, political, religious, the House Committee, etc. And these ebbed and flowed and changed over the years. The first club rooms were in Balmain, but later moved to 33A Glebe Point Road, just around the corner and down the street, where they stayed until 1980. Now, let us not forget that becoming a member of camp, putting your head above the parapet, so to speak, required a great deal of courage given the times. And among those foundation members were Peter Bonsall-Boone and Peter de Waal. Each threw themselves into the life of this new organisation in different ways. Peter in organisation, Bon heavily involved in Crossways, a religious group, as well as being secretary for a time. In those early days, the emphasis was not on equality as we know it today, but on liberation. Liberation of the self from the ingrained ideas and oppression, the ingrained homophobia that we were brought up with, and liberation of society at large from prejudice. To achieve this, emphasis was on coming out. Visibility was all important. So in 1972, when ABC TV's Chequerboard program came a-calling, Chequerboard was the Australian story of the day. Bon and Peter, together with Sue Wills and Gabby Antolovich, and let's not forget actually that women have a part in this history. Too often they're actually written out of this particular of the story of early gay movement and lesbian movement in Australia. Bon and Peter, Sue and Gabby agreed to appear on the program as two couples. This was coming out with a vengeance. And many remember Bon and Peter and that first same-sex kiss. The first on Australian television, before Joe Hasham in number 96. But unlike that soap, this was for real. Well, I presume it was. It was a brave act, and it demonstrated their level of commitment to each other and to their relationship, now 6 years old. As we know, the proverbial hit the fan when Bon subsequently lost his job as church secretary at St Clement's Mosman. It led to the third and largest homosexual demonstration so far seen, and a rare coming together of camp and the slightly more radical Sydney gay liberation that had split from camp earlier that year. This, of course, was small consolation for Bon, who was forced to seek other employment. What came next for Bon and Peter, however, was to prove of the utmost importance for the nascent gay community, and for which they truly should be lauded: the founding of Phone a Friend. They installed phone lines in a spare bedroom, and they began the first gay and lesbian counselling service in Australia. This was so crucial for the lives of closeted and isolated lesbians and gay men, especially in regional areas. We've heard already from one of the people who've written in. And for the first time, it provided non-judgmental advice on homosexuality, something that was not available at the time from the much-lauded Lifeline, run by the Lesbian Mission, although Lifeline eventually did come on board. Phone a Friend was to become really the last subgroup of camp left standing, in a way, and this was acknowledged when in 1981 Camp New South Wales became the Gay and Lesbian Counselling Service under the directorship of Terry Goulden, now incorporated in 2010. Before then, however, there was in 1976 there was the establishment of the Tribunal on Homosexual Discrimination, the organisation of which Peter was heavily involved with. Over a weekend, a panel, Dr. Jim Cairns, Bridget Gilling, Arthur Gietzl, or was it Barry? Arthur Gietzl, yes, heard evidence of widespread discrimination against gays and lesbians. The subsequent report was a landmark document, and this and the and this 6 years before homosexuality report of the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board. And also, there were 7 subsequent reports on discrimination, position papers really, published by the Gay Task Force. Not enough was made, I think, of the findings of that tribunal, nor of the task force publications at the time, partly because of the intransigence of the Parliament and parliamentarians. But by late 1970s, camp had moved more into the counselling organisation, was probably less seen as a law reform lobbying organisation, and that waited until 1980 with the establishment of Gras, an organisation which camp fully supported. In 1978, of course, as we've heard and we both know, both Peter and Bon were at the first Mardi Gras, and today are proud members of the 78ers. Others will talk about Peter's involvement in the importance of the Immigration Task Force and Bond's work in support of people living with HIV. I, however, would like to finish by jumping to the present and acknowledging their involvement in the Pride History Group, Sydney's Gay and Lesbian History Group, and in particular praise them for the publication of Unfit for Publication, the definitive listing of all cases of buggery in New South Wales. This is a massive undertaking by Peter, with Bond's assistance on digital input and as a researcher. And the result is monumental and definitive, as has been acknowledged by Dr. Graham Willett, probably the premier historian of the history of gay and lesbian activism in Australia. I think that, along with the establishment of Phone a Friend, will be the work for which Peter and Bond will be long remembered, lauded and thanked by future historians. With Peter's dogged determination and Bond's gentle persuasion, this has been a formidable and loving partnership of real achievement. It is a marriage, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, and long, long may it continue to blossom. My warmest congratulations to you both.